Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining. My name is Sotiris Georgiopoulos. I work for UK Power Networks, and I'm also the chair of the Open Network. So I will chair this session this morning. So thank you very much for joining. Good morning and good evening to some. I saw that we have someone from Tasmania, which apparently is at 7 o'clock at night. So thank you very much for joining and spending your evening with us. Hopefully that will be useful. So this is the Open Networks Dissemination Forum, and what this forum is meant to do is to give you a bite-sized view of some of the key developments of the key products, what is being delivered, what's happening in the project across a number of areas, as you can see on the agenda on the slide in front of us, and an opportunity to ask questions. If you are interested in terms of following up, we have all the key people here on the project. We have the product leads. We've got myself, and we have also Avi and Connor from ENA. So if you are interested in following up and finding out more, please ask questions. But at the same time, drop us a line, and we'll be very happy to engage and follow up from this. So that's all. What I had to say. Any questions, please put them in the chat whilst the presentations are taking place. We've allowed time to take questions at the end, or feel free to jump in and pose your question. But questions and feedback is very much welcomed. So I think without further ado, let's move on straight to the first presentation for the day, which is an overview of our flexibility services workstream, which is one of our key work streams and the main focus of a lot of the activity in open networks. So Avi, over to you to take us through that.
Thank you, Sotiris. Yeah, in the next 5 minutes, I intend to give you a quick overview of Workstream 1A. And oh, sorry, by the way, I'm Avi Aital. I'm the head of Open Networks. I'm stepping in for Ben Godfrey, unfortunately, who couldn't join, who is the chair of Workstream 1A. And today, like I said, I'll quickly take you through the Workstream 1A as a quick overview. So this is a workstream that focuses essentially on developing the local flex markets through standardization and simplification in the overall decision making that comes to everything local flex markets. So this is obviously in coordination with DNO and ESO, because if the ambition is to go towards a liquid market, we have to and we continue to work very closely with ESO. This work stream is delivering some of the key actions set out in the Smart System Flexibility Plan. And as you can probably see here, some of them might, the keywords there might ring true to you if you've read the Smart System Flexibility Plan. The overall work stream, I mean, I know it might be a repeat for somebody who's attended this in the past, but for the benefit of those who've not perhaps engaged with this as closely as some of the others, I'll quickly run through the overall structure of the work stream. The work stream is split out into a life cycle of flex procurement in general. So the first block would be the needs identification and the pre-procurement exercise. We have what we call a common methodology and definition of flex products there in under that umbrella. We then have the procurement itself, wherein we are looking at the procurement process and a standardization of agreement that goes with the flex markets. And the next block is operation and settlement, wherein we are looking to manage and determine and implement primacy rules for service conflicts between DSO and ESO, and kind of investigate this considerations of dispatch interoperability and how we can align settlement. There are also two other products that kind of underpin this work. So one is the reporting and information sharing. So we are currently looking to ways to harmonize how we share the flex connection, that is active network managed assets curtailment information. And this is something we've been implementing across the year 2022 and looking to do going forward. And we're also looking to report on the carbon footprint of all the assets that are delivering flexible. This forms a part of a standard license condition, which we are currently delivering collectively with all the networks for it, so that we can go into submission with Ofgem. There's also an overarching framework that is looking to set out a kind of a broader framework of flexibility as an industry, where things are heading and where we've, I guess, tracked last 5 years and where we're going in the next 5 years kind of view. So this is an overarching kind of a strategic piece not necessarily a tangible outcome more than an informative and an educative piece where, an industry as a whole can refer to that to see where we are as a landscape for this. Coming back to the key recent areas of updates, we've recently launched our flex figures, which collates the market size of local flexibility in GB, and we are delighted to report there's 3.7 gigawatts of flexibility tendered, which is nearly 31% increase from the previous year of assessment. So we recently closed our flexibility consultation, which was one of our key industry engagement exercise wherein we look to, I guess, put all our work out there and ask some of the key questions we like to get external stakeholder input on. Everybody is and continue to remain welcome to respond, although formally the consultation is closed. But in any case, just like this forum or any other discussions going forward, we are always keen to hear from stakeholders. But what the information we have received from consultation, we will pass it on to the individual product team to review and analyze those responses, and we will then put out another response to that closer to, I guess, somewhere in November, latest by end of November. And in the past, I guess, since our previous engagement across the first half of the year, our key, I guess, outcomes in terms of delivering transparency DNOs, we've have the initial first draft of common framework, common methodology for carbon reporting, and we have the recommended methodology for providing curtailment as estimates, and further alignment of standard agreement, which was an incremental development from the past year, and also an alignment for pre-qualification processes. This is kind of I guess, a quick stop view of the overall work stream. I think I hand back to Sotiris now, perhaps to take us through the individual products. Back to you, Sotiris.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you. So we can now start going into flexibility services, as you presented the overview, is one of our main work streams. So we'll now deep dive into some of the key products that we've chosen for this session. So I will hand over to Steve Miller from the Electricity System Operator, National Grid, to take us through procurement processes.
Thanks, Sotiris. Thanks, Avi. Hi everybody. Steve Miller from the ESO. I'm a senior contract manager in the market function of the ESO. I think we can skip I think it's an introductory slide. Yeah, thanks, Connor. Appreciate that. I appreciate the purpose of today's discussion was all about what we're doing on pre-qualification. But I just thought I'd provide a bit of a background and update of the aims of P2 and the procurement process, which is one of the products for the work stream. So the original aim of the product was to review all the current procurement processes carried out by each of the DNOs and the ESO to ultimately improve the market experience for the potential flexible service providers. And some of you may be aware, previously the DNOs have delivered alignment across some of the activities related to procurement of flexible services. So that is, for those that don't know, flexible services is to produce or absorb power in times of need. And then furthermore, in 2021, we looked at how we could further evolve the alignment and understanding what could be done to align with the current ESO procurement activities. And through a consultation exercise and process and through extensive stakeholder engagement, we did actually conclude in 2021 that more value could be achieved in focusing on alignment through pre-qualification and technical specification in particular. In addition to that, there was this significant push to try and procure flexible services closer to real time. Again, a move that the ESO successfully implemented recently. What we did find useful in 2021 through that stakeholder engagement was an opportunity really just to update the information that's available on the ENA flexibility services web pages. So what we pulled together was some details on future procurement events for 2022 and beyond. So market participants and flexible service providers can easily see what's coming up and how they can participate in those procurement events. I think that needs a little bit of an update, but there is more detail on the ENA Flexibility Services webpage. So that's how we got to where we are now. In 2022, the aims are on the back of the stakeholder engagement in 2021 was to recommend standardization of pre-qualification processes, as we talked about, and how we can move towards real-time procurement and outline those short, medium, and longer term steps. Happy if you want to move on, Connor. So first step for this year was to look at how we can move to real-time procurement and the necessary activities required to ensure basically this is a sustainable and efficient process. How we went about this, we reviewed the current procurement processes and development plans across the DNOs and the ESO, and we've developed a bit of a high-level overview of those steps. As outlined on the slide, as you can see there. There is the first period, so the first sort of short terms, the first 12 months is all about knowledge gathering and trying to remove any blockers to minimise network risk. You'll see that there's a lot of dependency on other products within the work stream, and obviously there's some obligations we need to comply with, especially procurement law. So. Medium term is all about the preparation and planning, basically. So it's all about once you've overcome those constraints and any network risks through the short term, we can develop the products and processes and systems to enable that real-time procurement. So it's reaching out to the industry, it's reaching out to market participants, and developing sustainable products, processes, and making sure we can actually use those products processes within the systems we've got or develop new systems. Again, heavily dependent on the outputs from other products, P2, P3, P6 in particular. And then the longer term is all about the implementation. There's obviously a natural overlap with the medium term, hence we put the 1 to sort of 5 year horizon on there. And the rate of evolution is clearly dependent on many factors. The discussions I've had within the product group, some of the DNOs are more, should I say, more mature or advanced in their development plans, and some of their procurement processes already. Some of them are actually looking to real-time procurement maybe in the next couple of years. Some a little bit further away. Again, the rate of evolution and transparency is very much dependent on a number of other products within the work stream. We've put a link to a paper that we published on the ENO website at the top there. So again, if there's any further information that you need, then feel free to go to that link. And obviously, once you read the full paper, there might be some further questions you might have. So that's real-time procurement. And I think the main purpose of today is the next slide, which is all about the alignment of pre-qualification processes. So you have to forgive me for a little bit because I've been out of the loop for the last 3 or 4 months, and my co-products lead, Helen Sorden from WPD, has been doing a lot of work on this Deliverable 2, which is the alignment of pre-qualification processes. So I can provide you an update, but any further information probably either go to the ENA website where we publish the paper, and or reach out to me and Helen. So this part was all about looking at the pre-qualification process, and trying to look at a standard approach, including convergence of timescales, so we can accommodate even smaller flexibility service providers. So far this year, we've reviewed all the procurement processes across each of the networks, and I think it's quite clear that the process falls into 2 discrete categories, technical and commercial. We think the main focus and the main value is establishing a technical template that the markets can use across each of the networks and again across the ESO. For example, once we've registered an asset to provide flexible services in one DNO, we should be able to pretty much use the same template for each of the DNOs, therefore mitigating a lot of admin, a lot of time, and providing greater value for those market participants. Or if in a ideal world, we want to be able to just submit one template, which can then just be used for all the all the procurement activities that are being run by each of the DNOs in the ESO. We also identified some quick wins, which should be prioritised. For example, some alignment of commercial qualification. And we also recognise that, in the last point there, that templates should be marketplace agnostic, so suitable for all providers, whether that's through a manual submission, online or API submission. So that's what we've done so far on pre-qualification processes. Again, further information on the website where we've published the paper. And I have tested that link, it does work, so hopefully you shouldn't have any problems. Next slide. I think it's the last slide. I think it's all about the next steps. Okay, so the final is the next steps, which we're starting to review now. The consultation that ran earlier this year is just closed for the open networks. So we're going to be reviewing all the consultation responses, seeking further stakeholder feedback from our internal sort of challenge groups, but also this dissemination forum, and then look to set out some detailed implementation plans in Q4 in 2022. So you'll see that pretty much it's the same process for the steps to real time, but also the alignment of pre-qualification process. So yeah, so I'm I think that's about 10 minutes maybe. So obviously I think we've got some time for some questions. I may be able to answer some now. I might have to take some away. But yeah, I believe also the slides are going to be shared as well. Connor, please correct me afterwards, and also hopefully our contact details as well, because I'm conscious I didn't put my contact details on the slides. I'll end there and I'll breathe.
Thank you, Steve. And as you said, we're happy to take questions, clarifications, or otherwise on what was presented. If you want to drop them in the chat or just come off mute and ask them directly, however you want to do it. Just to say on this that you know, it's part of we've done a fair bit of work on aligning pre-qualification. All DNOs carry out a 2 flexibility tender round cycle per annum, but you know, the feedback we are getting is that you know, getting a more common and consistent experience on that kind of front end of the flexibility journey for providers, especially for those who operate in multiple multiple regions of the country, is very important. So the detailed implementation plan is critical, and that is going to come essentially as part of our 2023 plan. But that's an area that we really want to kind of push forward. Okay, so we've got, while I'm talking away, we have a couple of questions. 3.7 gigawatts of flex. So Avi, if you want to take the first one. Unclear, 3.7 gigawatts of flex tender, these are at distribution level only or also transmission?
Just to, yeah, those 3.7 figures correspond to the DSO market specifically. So they are at the distribution level, at constraint management of the standard product, 4 standard products that the DNOs currently use that has come out of open networks.
Thank you. And Martin, the commercial pre-qualification criteria of some DNOs are a barrier to some of the products. I would be happy to share the details via email if it would be useful. It would be very useful, Martin. Yes, that's the purpose of this work, is to reduce or remove the barriers. So if you can drop us a line, I think we'll put on the chat the relevant details, if that's okay.
Yeah,
and Steve.
I would be very happy to receive that, Martin. And thanks for your offer. As just to reiterate what Satiria said, this is the feedback we need to try and unlock those barriers. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Thanks, Martin. Okay, good. All right, I think we'll move on to the next presentation. So Steve, thank you very much. And thank you for the questions.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, let's go on to Andy Rice.
I think as we are running ever so slightly ahead, fortunately, Andy's not on the call at the moment.
Okay.
Give me one moment. I will just see who we are able to. Whilst a notable change in the running order of events here, I perhaps suggest, whilst I try and get a hold of Andy and to join slightly early, we shift to the wider program updates with Avi, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, can do. Yes.
If I could just jump in there quickly, Connor, I've just messaged Andy. Yeah, he's a bit surprised by running a little bit early, so he should be joining shortly.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we see whether we can get Andy on in the next minute or so. Okay. All right, so let's take
Andy's here, Connor. Let's jump back to that.
Yeah, Andy's here, so let's stick with a running order. In case people want to have come into a specific thing. So Andy, thank you very much for joining early. Hopefully we haven't rushed you too much. Are you there?
Yeah, no, I'm here now. Sorry, I was yeah, I had my apologies, everyone. I was
no problem. Okay,
expecting a 10:30 dial-in. So, but happy to come in early. It's fine.
Cool. Okay, Andy, over to you if you want to introduce yourself and the work you're doing.
Hi, absolutely. Yeah. So, my name's Andy Rice. I work for the National Grid ESO. And also I am the product lead along with my colleague Abisola for the standard agreement, so the P4 product in the for the E&A workstream. So yeah, so just to sort of going on, so following on from last year, where we launched the standard agreement, the work stream for 2022 has been looking at working to align the schedules that underpin the standard agreement, which you put out last year. And what we've done is there is a move from the schedules which were out previously, which were sort of schedules 1 to 8, and to move them towards a service-based structure. So initially we were looking at the DNO services, the DNO active service and the DNO reactive service, and then the ESO response and reserve services to be able to do that. Initially, so this is sort of the first of, and I need to be really clear about it, this piece of work is the first of a progression of steps over the coming years for greater alignment. But this is the first step towards that. So what you'll see when we get into a further slide is that, and whilst the headers of like the service terms and the glossary and annexes, etc., will be the same, there will be difference in the initial structure of the content within these that we're proposing, and this is because of a couple of things. One, it reflects the different approaches that are currently used across the DNOs and the ESO in terms of the way that attenders, and then the fact that across the organisations we are also using either a sort of a more of a traditional contract, as opposed to some of the organisations which are using framework agreements. So looking at sort of that call-off approach, or everything signed up in advance to just be able to run in tenders, etc. So as you can see on the diagram here on the right-hand side, is broadly how at a high level this structure is going to look. So you've got the services across the top, and then you've got the standard agreement and the standard agreement glossary, and they're already there. And then supporting these is this new structure, and this is on a service by service basis. So whether you were to pick up the D&O active service or the ESO response service, you would look and you'd see a set of service terms, a glossary, an annex, a forms and templates, and a signatures type of document area to be able to do that. So if you just move on to the next slide, please, that'd be great. So why have we gone out for consultation? You know, why do we think this is the way to move forward in this structure? And what we've got here is listed, sort of a list of the benefits that we see following this approach will do. So firstly is the flexibility. So the initial structure will allow for the different organisations in regard to the way that they've got product design currently, and the way they procure, and the way that they award their contracts. So it gives the same look and feel, but it allows that initial flexibility to be able to do that. Looking forward, it looks like as organisations, we know this, are looking to move from a more of a traditional contract basis to a framework agreement, this structure will allow that to happen. It will also allow the difference between sort of a longer term contracts to be awarded to intraday or day ahead procurement to work. It will allow the service-based structure will allow, so when the output from future sort of W1SA such as P2 and P6, so that's procurement process and service design are realised, there's a structure in place that will allow those to work. So as we get closer to service design across the organisation, for example, then the way that the information that will be held within those, there's a structure there that would already accommodate that. And then there's a consistency approach. So whichever one you pick up, it will have the same look and feel around it, the same sort of naming conventions to it. And the sort of one of the initial comfort factors, and when you go through these, is you'll sort of one of the mapping exercises on this is that these are already a combination of clauses or schedules that we're already using. We've just put them into a different sort of format and order. So it's a realignment of the schedules used under 1.2 of the standard agreement that the DNOs use, and equally it uses the ESO's current frequency contractual documents and the look and feel of those, and you can see those in a couple of slides in a minute. And then where possible, we're looking, it's intention that we will sort of use the same wording for clauses, etc., across the different services. And this is cost, this saves time and costs for providers and for the organisations that are using it. So this is where we see the proposed benefits are for looking at this structure. So just move on to the next slide, please. So this is how we got to where we're at. So for those of you who are interested, so on there we've got the initial mapping structure. Not sure where the boxes are different. I think that's my error, so apologies for that. But on the if you see on the new name, which is service terms, and then you've got the annexes, forms and templates and signatures. Now, service specific glossary is deliberately not mapped over because that's been new to the service, so therefore there isn't really a map that goes into that. But you'll see in the service terms, sort of when you look into the column V1.2 or the ESO element, you'll see what where the current schedules and the current contractual documents that are used by the organisation, where these will now fit in the new service structure. So this was just the initial mapping that we have done for that. So those of you familiar with it, you'll be able to see, okay, I can see that Schedule 7 and Schedule 5 under the version that are currently being used by the DNOs for this will now sit in the annexes, and service description, for example, for version 1.2 will now sit in service terms. So I'm not going to go through them all, but there's an example of where you can see where they're going to sit in the new structure. If you just move through to the next slide. So this is our, and I stress this is our first look at our first draft of what the content will be within each of those. And this is where I pointed out earlier. If you look at sort of the D&O in the service terms and indeed the annexes, you'll see that under those you'll have sort of the ESO and the D&Os, and some of those will vary in length and the content of them. And this is, as I say, this is the first step. So we expect those over the coming years to be far more aligned, or to align. But this is just a reflection of how the different services are looking at the minute and how the procurement structure and contracting structure is going across the organisation. So we know it doesn't map entirely. So we know they are, so from a D&O and an ESO perspective at the moment, that there is quite a difference. Or even throughout different organisations, if they are contracting you differently, then your service terms will have different, may have sort of the more content than the less. But we see over the next coming years that I say that will align greater, so there will be just sort of one column there. Next slide, please. So I think is questions. Oh, okay, yeah. So sorry, one last slide. So this is just basically saying that that what we just walked through here and the structure you've just seen, we've gone out for the industry consultation on this to get feedback from industry to their thoughts around this, what they feel about it. Do they agree with it? Do they disagree with it? Is there anything else they'd like to see in there, given even if it couldn't be fit into this, but it could go into the planning for future workloads for the P4 work stream on this. So yeah, we're hoping that the industry and our initial feedback from things like the stakeholder groups that we've run a couple of times through the E&A in, I think it was May and September, Connor, if I've got that wrong, please correct me, has been we've been receiving a positive response on this structure so far. So it'd be really interesting to hear your questions at the end of this session. I think that's moving on to questions now. Yeah.
Thank you, Andy. We can take questions or clarifications. Or comments, or anyone who's got experience working with the contracts and they'd like to tell us what they think about it. Andy, the documents, the key documents are on the E&A website, right? In terms of if people want to see the kind of the current version of standard contracts, etc.
Yes, the version 1.2 schedules are on the E&A website. I don't believe the ESO ones are on the E&A website, but we can send links out to where they are at the end of this if we need to. In fact, we could maybe a slide with those links in there when we publish these.
Okay. Very good. Any questions? Okay. So Andy, what are the next steps? So you said that we are out of consultation in terms of the structure that you went through and kind of the direction of travel of alignment.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see this playing out in the next 12 months or so?
So the first step will be consultation responses and working through those and making sure that we've addressed either the support for them, so we can when we get to these being approved, which I think towards the end of this year, or address any concerns around them, that we can either put into the response and make the changes, or that we can feed into further work that we're planning to do over sort of 2023 for next year. So the next big piece of work for the P4 product is again looking at, as I said on one of the slides there, that initial sort of structure as how it look, how the like the sub-content under the headings. That's our first look at that. I think the big piece of work for next year is looking at how to develop that, whether it sits the way it should do, but also working really closely with the other work streams, particularly P2 and P6, to make sure that the output of any of the work that's been realised through these is accommodated and can be put into the P4 product. So the next piece of work is that sub-content and working those structures and those documents up into the new format is the next big piece of work for the P4 product. Yeah.
Thank you. And what are the main concerns, the kind of the sticky points that you think that we are up against in terms of kind of the next major alignment?
I wouldn't say it's a concern, but I think it's definitely a point of note, which I mentioned earlier, and I'll reiterate again, is that across all the organisations that are using these, so the DNOs and the ESO, is there are different time frames for the adaptation of like moving to day-ahead procurement or moving to framework agreements and things like that. So it's working to ensure that there at a level that all parties can still use the standard agreement. It's not a concern. I think it's just a well-known that there are different timeframes across the organisations for the implementation of where they want to go in terms of the way they, the regularity that they procure, if it's day ahead or week ahead or 6 monthly, or do they want to go down traditional contracting route for long term, or is it day ahead procurement? And I think that will have a determination of how quickly that these align. That's my point. I'm not concerned about it, but I think that's something that we should always note.
It's a timing issue, essentially. Yeah, in terms of developing a minimum standard, if you like. Whilst some organizations might be moving faster than others.
Yeah. So I say a consideration, not a concern, I think, is that way I'll spin that. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you, Andy. If there are no questions on this, I think we can move on to my colleague Sam Doe, who's going to run us through the work on carbon reporting. Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Sotiris, and good morning, everyone. Carbon reporting. So I'm the product lead of Product 7, and Product 7 is tasked with developing a standard methodology that all distribution companies will adopt to report on the carbon impacts of flexibility services. And the objective came out of the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan as one of the actions, whereby Bayes and Ofgem wanted networks and system operators to have a consistent methodology for reporting carbon for flexibility by 2023. And so the product team was set up to deliver this objective. So the policy intent was to make the carbon impacts of flexibility services and flexibility services actions visible and transparent. The reports between companies to be consistent, to potentially inform future possible interventions to make the flexibility market consistent with net zero. So the product team looked to develop a methodology to feed particularly into the license condition report called LC31E report by April 2023. And also to make recommendations for future work. The product team consisted of representations from other distribution companies, the ESO, Bayes, and we also had input from Ofgem. Deliverables of the product team included agreeing a more detailed scope, reviewing other carbon accounting methodologies which is used elsewhere, and proposing a methodology. This has gone out to consultation. We're in the process of reviewing feedback and we'll be looking to make recommendations on potential updates as well as future work as well. So, so the carbon impacts of flexibility services has been broadly broken down into three main types: direct, indirect, and consequential. You can see at the top there, in the blue row, it shows the life cycle of using flexibility services from the investment decision, which is where the DSO would decide whether to use flexibility or the traditional network option. Procuring the flexibility resource, pre-dispatch, which could be, the battery charging up or the asset being put on standby. Dispatch which is when the energy is requested and delivered. Post-dispatch could be when the demand-side response rebounds to recoup the energy that was delivered, and then decommissioning is kind of the end of life at the end of the resource's lifetime. So it's important to point out here that product 7 scope is to look at the outturn carbon impacts of using flexibility services. Was the counterfactual carbon impacts, say you saw the carbon impacts of reinforcement, is out of scope, and also the optioneering between different options is also out of scope of P7, which would require the carbon calculation for the counterfactual of flexibility, which may be reinforcement. It may also include the impact on wider network losses, and that's out of scope. So focusing on the direct, indirect, and consequential impacts of outturn flexibility actions. Direct can be, say, if your generator, the fuel combustion, that's the most obvious example of the direct impact. Indirect is embedded emissions, as well as end-of-life emissions, whilst consequential are second-order effects, such as a battery charging up to get the energy in order to deliver the service, or demand-side response rebounding after the event, or the exported energy displacing wider generation. So if you can move on to the next slide, Stuart. We created formulas based on the type of technology, broadly characterized by whether it is generation, demand, or storage. And this is on the next slide, which I'll go through. We decided to, in the methodology, quantify the direct and consequential carbon impacts. Indirect carbon impacts was recommended as part of future work. And the reason why we decided to prioritize direct and consequential was because, based on the policy intent, we needed to be comparable with the ESO approach, which currently is direct only carbon calculations, and also the data sets and the assumptions used for calculating direct carbon impacts is readily available and is standard. And conversely, the data set and the assumptions you need to calculate the indirect carbon impacts is not standard and would require and may mean greater divergence between the reports. So this is a kind of a baseline methodology from which we're going to develop and can build on increasing accuracy as we have more experience of running these calculations. The conversion factors we use are mostly industry standard. So when I say conversion factors, I mean emissions factors from burning different types of fuels. Also the carbon intensity of the grid electricity that's imported, and also the efficiencies of different generators. So they're generally, so we've used the standard. Where we haven't used the standard is the assumptions around where the proportion of energy that's rebounded from demand-side response, but we have used data from a previous trial to run that calculation, and it was also included in the consultation to request feedback from the industry if they have alternative conversion factors that we should look at. We also standardized how the data would be presented in the distribution flexibility services procurement report, which is one of the reports under our license condition. And also we made a number of different recommendations for future work, which includes, as I mentioned before, adding on indirect carbon calculations, also using more granular carbon intensity factors, also potentially looking at whether we can forecast future carbon intensity rather than just reporting outturn, and a number of other recommendations which is set out in the report. And move to the next slide. So this slide shows the in a bit more detail how we would calculate the carbon intensity based on those three types of technologies: generation, storage, and demand. So for generation, there's two types of carbon impacts. There's the direct and then there's a consequential. The direct is the combustion of the fuel. So we take the energy that is dispatched and we divide it by the efficiency of the generator, and we multiply that by the emissions factor of the fuel, and that gives the assumed carbon impact of combusting that fuel. And the second carbon impact is the consequential, as I mentioned. That is displacing grid generation when you export the electricity. So that takes the energy exported multiplied by the grid intensity, and it's negative because it's displacing that generation, and the net effect is the summation of the two. Storage is a little bit different because it takes into account the energy that comes in when it was charged, and this could come from importing from the grid, if it is imported directly from the grid, or from the combustion of a fuel if it's from a generator, and then the export is also similar to the generation side. So if it's exporting, it's assumed to displace grid generation. On the demand side, there's also two types. One is reduced grid imports. So if you're turning down, that's going to displace the imported electricity from the grid. And the other component is the payback, otherwise known as rebound, which is where there would be an increase in demand following the turn down event, which you'd see if it was, say, if it's a HVAC system in an office, turning down the electricity consumption for a short period will result in a rebound to recover the temperature in that office. So that's payback, but there's also an assumption on assets which load shift as well. So if it's deferred charging, like electric vehicles deferred charging, then you'd assume that there's a 100% payback at a later period. So that's general. That's the basis of the calculations. There's a lot more detail in the reports, which is available for you to download and review. But if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer it now.
Thanks, Sam. There is a question from Grant Wilson in the chat. What are the time and spatial granularity of electrical grid emissions at the moment? And where do you see this heading in terms of greater granularity?
Yeah, so the granularity of electrical grid emissions. You
talked about grid intensity.
Yeah.
So I think that's you want to talk a little bit more about what values are being used and where you see that going.
Yeah, so I mean so at the moment we recommend, so there's a number of different data sources that we can use for grid intensity. The one that we're currently using is or recommending to use is from the Green Books, which is a marginal carbon dioxide equivalent grid intensity. That's a static value, so it doesn't change. there is a dynamic more granular data set from the ESO's grid intensity. However, there are some limitations with that at the moment because it is an average factor. It's not marginal. And because we're dealing with or calculating the change in the carbon intensity, we wanted to use a marginal grid intensity. So there is a bit of some further thought to be had about whether which option is preferable, given there is limitations under both approaches. And potentially the ESO, which we're working with, who's part of this product team, may be looking at incorporating or calculating the marginal grid intensity on a granular basis, which we can use. But it is a question that we had comments back on the consultation, and we're reviewing that now as to which approach is best. Acknowledging that there's limitations under both approach. One is granular, but it isn't a marginal factor, and also it doesn't include all greenhouse gases. It's just carbon dioxide, versus a static factor, but it has the all greenhouse gases, and it is a marginal factor, which is more appropriate for calculating a change in carbon.
Maxine, you're on mute, I think. Yeah.
So we've had quite a bit of discussion on this as well at the challenge group, and I think it was those comments reflected in the response to the consultation, because I think the concern is if particularly for demand side response and storage, if in any sense either the rebound or the recharging is at a lower grid intensity, then you're kind of not unfairly, but you're sort of systematically under or kind of over attributing carbon to them. So it's sort of making sure that in the way that the methodology works, that it's not treating particular technologies disproportionately differently to others. But I recognise, you're trying to balance a number of different things there. But that's the basis, I think, of the concerns that have come through about whether you use static or granular is the impacts on different technologies.
Yes, and I think we can all agree that granular carbon intensities is the way to go, and that's the direction of travel. And I forgot to mention about the assumptions you need to make as well to make use of this data set, which is when will the battery charge up, when would the demand side response rebound, or when would the demand side response shift their load. These were a couple of the questions which we put in the consultation. There wasn't an explicit or recommendation as to what assumptions we need to make, and I think maybe we need to do some more investigations as to what assumptions we should use in order to make use of these granular data sets.
Thank you, Maxine. Thank you, Sam. Any further questions on carbon reporting? Sam, you mentioned that this calculation will be, all this data will be provided as part of the distribution flexibility statements, procurement statements for its DNOs, and I believe it has already been incorporated or is planned to be incorporated on the next publication.
It will be in the next publication, so that's when we are obliged to include it.
Okay.
DNOs is optional to have done it before, but it wouldn't been standardized for the previous report. But this forthcoming one in April 23 will include this calculation for all of the DNOs.
Yeah. So for those not familiar, the DNOs as of the last some point, I think earlier this year, at the beginning of this year, we have a license condition to produce a flexibility procurement statement in April of each year that sets out our flexibility work in a set of sections agreed with Ofgem, the regulator, and then there is a summary one done 12 months later to look back, if you like, at what happened versus the look forward. And the carbon reporting is one of those sections, which has been included in the first report. So the first flexibility procurement statements are in the DNO's websites already, because we did one for 2022, but as Sam said, the standard calculation carbon on carbon, it'll be included in the next one. Okay, good. Doesn't look like there are any other questions, so thanks Sam. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so we're about 10 minutes ahead, so I think we're gonna go into a break. And if we can be back ready to start, we'll go in the next session, which is the whole system work stream at 11:10 with Ian Povey, that's going to give us a bit of an overview. And then the next two products we're going to cover our work on operational data sharing, and also distributed energy resource visibility and data sharing, which is really good work. It's going to come after the break. If we can all be back at 11:10, ready to start. Thank you. Okay, I hope everybody had the opportunity to have a break and get refreshed and get a cup of tea. And we are ready to move on to section 2 on the whole electricity system workstream. So Ian, who's chairing the work, is going to give us a bit of an overview and demystify what's going on. And then we have a couple of deep dives. Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. You set me up to fail there, but thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm Ian Povey of Electricity Northwest, and I am the leader of Workstream 1B, which is looking at whole electricity system planning and P&D data exchange. In a few moments, I'll be handing you over to my colleagues, Adelia, who will be taking you through operational DER data and visibility and exchange. And then after that, I'll be handing you over to Malcolm, who's been looking at operational data sharing in the wider sense, not just DER data, but general transmission distribution data. But before I go into that, I'd like to just take you through a little bit about what whole electricity system planning and Workstream 1B has done this year particularly. There are 5 active groups in Workstream 1B, groups of products, should I say. The 2 of them we'll be going into in detail in a few moments, so I won't really talk about those now. I want to just take you through the other products and what we've done there. So taking them in order, we've got product 2, which is future energy scenarios. What's been achieved there, not just this year, but over a number of years now, is that we've developed a standardized DSO process for forecasting for the purposes of DFESs. The DFES is the distribution future energy scenarios, which will give you a view on the demands and generation that we're anticipating over the next 10, 20 years. That work has been developed in a common, it's developed a common framework and building blocks, and it links in quite closely with the framework that National Grid ESO use for their future energy scenarios work. So that work has been going on for a number of years, and each year we're reviewing those building blocks and the interface with National Grid to look for improvements on the data that we're sharing. This year, particularly, we've been focusing on developing what we're terming a best view scenario. And that best view scenario is one with the highest probability combining the other scenarios. So it develops a high probability scenario. And that is used along with all the other scenarios to feed into our network development plans, our long-term development statements, and other such publications that we have. So that's what we've been doing in product 2 this year. Quite closely linked really to product 2 is product 5. That's our network development plans. They build on the energy forecast, the DFESs and the FES, to produce network development plans for the distribution network operators. It's a license requirement that we have to publish these, and the first publication happened this year. I think it was May this year, the first publication of network development plans. Again, we're using the FES scenarios, and particularly the best view scenario that has been developed in product 2. This year in May was the first publication, as I said before, and what we're doing and hoping to deliver this year is a review of that publication, taking on board stakeholder views on that and seeing where we can improve. And we're hoping to reissue the form of statement for the network development plans this year that will be used for the next network development plan, which the license requires every 2 years. I think it's the intention of most, if not all, the DNOs to do this on an annual basis. So that's product 2 and product 5. Finally, the whole system electricity coordination register, that was P9, and that has delivered a form of statement for all DNOs and National Grid ESO to use when publishing our license required registers. That was published this year for the first time. The register has been reviewed, and I think it's been considered fit for purpose. So we will use that same form of statement next year, and again review to see whether we need to change anything following next year's publications. So that's what we've done this year on the products that we're not going to take you through in detail. So the first one I'm going to hand you over to is Adelia, and she's looking at operational visibility and data sharing. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Adelia. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm Adelia Bertetti, Power System Lead at UK Power Networks and lead Workstream 1BP6, which covers operational DR visibility and monitoring. So today I will present the work delivered by the product team this year so far, which is the harmonization of DR to DNO data exchange, which covers deliverable C and D of this year's work. So thanks for the opportunity to come here and discuss about it. Yeah, I think we have 15 minutes presentation and 5 minutes Q&A at the end. So happy to take any question at the end of the presentation. So as a bit of a background, so DR connecting to the distribution network are required to be able to exchange real-time data to the DNO, which includes control instruction from the DNO, like an active power set point, for example. And this is especially true if the DR is under a ANM flexible connection. And DR are also required to provide real-time data back to the DNO, such as metering, breaker status, readbacks, and so on. So currently, developers connecting DR across different regions of GB are required to exchange different sets of monitoring and control data sets at the connection interface. And that depends on the DNO area where the site falls into. So you may have different requirements in a UKPN area, WPD, SSCN, NPG, ENW, and so on. So the product team has been tasked with harmonizing DR monitoring and control requirements at the connection interface for the DR connection going forward. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so just to set in the boundary of what the DR are in scope and what data points are in scope. So as I mentioned, the data are both metering points, so that are points from the DR to the DNO, but also control points from the DNO back to the DR. So this refers to operational metering data from the customer equipment at the DR substation rather than DNO equipment. So for example, operational metering, DNO would have their own operational metering, customer would have their own operational metering, and this work refers to the customer side of things, so through customer owns equipment. This refers to data exchange real-time via SCADA rather than post-event data. The DR type covered are generation and flexible demand. Point of connection covers from EHV to HV, and the capacity is anything connected from HV and above, and that depends on, so it's driven by DNO specific practices, so it's either 200 kilowatt, 500, depending on the DNO, and connection day that would apply to DR connecting to the distribution network going forward, so not retrospectively. If you can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, so brief overview of the deliverable, which this presentation covers. So in deliverable C, we were asked to produce a recommendation on the operational data points to be collected by DNO going forward. So an harmonized list, which may be differentiated based on capacity, service provided, technology type, and so on. In deliverable D, we were asked to justify the business needs for each of the data points through the definition of use cases, which provide clarity on how each of the collected data points will actually be used by DNO's ESO and the benefits that they could unlock. If you can move to the next slide, please. Okay, yeah, so the slide captures the approach taken to harmonize the DR DNO data requirement. So we initially collected monitoring and control requirements from different sources, including DNO specific requirements, distribution code, grid code, CASC, and also we looked at additional data points that are currently not collected, which we consider to be beneficial going forward. So this was used to create a combined data point list of monitoring and control points, which we use to carry out a gap analysis, which I will present later. So for each of these data points, we have looked at use cases. So for so basically, how DNO ESO are going to make use of this data point, which helped us assessing the level of benefits that could be unlocked by making use of this data point. And this informed the recommendation on the set of data exchange point that DR customers should be able to exchange with the DNO if requested going forward. Moving to the next slide, thank you. So yeah, we started looking at what is currently mandated by EREC G99, which represent the common ground across GB, which is captured in the table here. So it's mostly type C. The customers are required to provide this information back to the DNO if requested. So beside the data point mandated by industry code, DNO may agree the submission of additional interface data requirement. It's part of their connection agreement to meet the relevant commercial and technical obligation to meet their connection agreement. And so beside that, we also looked at additional data points which are currently not requested by G99 by any of the DNO, but that we believe would be really beneficial going forward. And one of these include electricity storage state of charge, and the other were visibility of the service which is being delivered in real time. And I'm going to go through the use cases later. Moving on to the next slide, please. To the next one. Good. So this table is the combined aggregated data point list, which is broken down into categories. So you can see the first category is customer metering, so the net metering at the point of connection. The next one is metering from individual units. So this is in the scenario where the site is made up of several power generating modules. So it's a power generating facility made up of several power generating modules. So that would be the metering from the individual units, or like the metering from separate metering between generation and demand. Then we have the customer breaker status, which include G99 breaker, individual power generating modules breaker, behind the meter network status, and so on. Then we have DR availability, which includes DR in service, number of connected generators, potential power available, and so on. Then we have weather data, so wind speed, wind direction, irradiance, readbacks. So these are feedback of the set point received by the DNO. So it's having visibility from the customer that they have received an instruction from the DNO. So that is to give more confidence to the DNO that the signal has been received by the DR. Other category is the mode of operation. So whether it's like P control, Q control, B control, frequency control, and so on. If you can move to the next slide. Thank you. And then the next one is service. The last one is service provision, which is visibility of what is the service that the customer is providing, delivering in real time, and the volume that it is being delivered for each of the services. So that was for metering point, and then the other category is control points. So from the DNO to the DR, and that is differentiated into analog control points. So active power set point, reactive power set point, voltage target, and the digital points like breaker trip, blocking signal, and so on. So the green one are the data points which are currently being collected by each of the DNO. So I think it's better if you move to the previous slide, actually. Thank you. So whereas the gray one are the data points which are currently not being collected by the specific DNO. So you can see there are some discrepancies. So the purpose of this product was to align and harmonize the requested data points, exchange data points going forward. Good. Yeah. So moving into slides. Thank you. Yeah, so we have then assessed use cases for each of the data points. In the interest of time, I'm just going to cover some of them today, and you have the complete list in the report that has recently been published. So the first data points is the metering from each Power Park modules. So you can see on the drawing on the left, that this represents the metering, from each power generating modules rather than metering from the power generating facility. So the DNO will have visibility of the DNO metering, which is at the top, but then what we are looking at in this specific use case is the blue metering. So metering from each power generating module, as well as metering from flexible demand, aggregated metering from flexible demand, and aggregated metering for flexible generation. So we have identified a number of use cases, and the outcome was that these data points could potentially deliver significant benefits. So the first use case was that it would allow to manage sites with multiple generators at different life of stack positions. So we are seeing more often customers applying. So after they have applied for a flex connection, subsequently, like after a few years, they would apply for an extension, which would be in a different life of stack position because of other customers having applied in between. So metering from individual units within a power generating facility would allow A&M to manage multiple DR with different life of stack position connected at the same site, as A&M needs individual output to be able to ensure compliance with the service request and to protect the network. So without metering from each of the units, this would not be possible. So the customer would either need to apply for a different point of connection, or the whole site would need to move to the lowest life of stack position, which is not the preferred approach from customers. So this was considered to be like a big use case. The next one is the allowing different units in the power generating facility to provide different services, and that's for service delivery and settlement. So the metering from individual Power Park modules would allow customer to provide different services like PM, flex service, megawatt dispatch, and so on within the Power Park module. So within the power generating facility, and monitoring of individual units is required to verify compliance with the service request and would allow to take proactive action when the service is not being delivered. Next use case was more accurate DNO and ESO operational forecasting. So DNOs are developing operational forecasting capability, and having visibility of the individual units together with the technology type would allow us to be able to forecast the overall output in a much more accurate way compared if we had only visibility of the net metering without having visibility of the technology mix downstream, as operational forecasting takes into account different modules like PV forecast, wind forecast. So the more information we have, the more accurate the forecast could be. So, and that's is translated into customer benefits ultimately. Next one is network operation. So having visibility of the real-time output of each unit within a power generating facility allow give a view on like what the pickup load at any moment in time could be. As an example, if there is like a 20 megawatt generation and 20 megawatt flexible demand downstream, like on a site, the net metering would be 0, but then having a view that if any of the units trips, then we will have a pickup load of like 20 megawatt. That is like really useful for control engineers and to be able to protect the network as much as we can. So based on these use cases, these data points are considered to be beneficial and could potentially deliver significant benefits. Moving to the next category is DR availability. So the data, this one here. So the data points is the installed capacity in service. So you can see in the drawings, the total capacity in service in that case would be 60 MVA. But for example, if there is a maintenance on any of the units, which would remove like 30 megawatt, then having visibility that the total capacity in service is actually 30 megawatt, 30 MVA would unlock considerable benefits. for the use case that I'm going to go through now. So the first one is better modeling of the capacity that can be offered control for different DNO ESO services. Yeah, and this is especially relevant for closer to real-time procurement, like post-fault services. So having visibility of the capacity in service, yeah, will give visibility of the capacity that can be dispatched at any moment in time if there is any network need. The other was better accuracy of operational forecasting, same as before. So in that case, the forecasting system would forecast based on a 30 MVA maximum output rather than a 60 MVA maximum output. So this could feed into DNO's forecasting system for better operational, better accuracy. Next one is avoiding service conflict. So having visibility of whether the DR is in service and that the generator is operating at a reduced capacity would inform on the capacity that can be released without creating any conflict of service. So that's to avoid service nullification. And then the last one is optimize curtailment thresholds. So basically, A&M thresholds are determined looking into at the worst possible ramp rates. And so if we know it's actually a limited capacity, the ramp rates are also going to, so the overall response would also be more limited compared if it was the whole capacity in service. So this information could be used to optimize curtailment threshold, which ultimately corresponds to like lower thresholds and lower curtailment. Okay, next use cases. Yeah, is a potential power available. So having visibility of the potential power available from customers. So this is especially relevant for wind farms, PV, any like variable source. So this is also considered to be beneficial and would unlock considerable benefits. So, and this is especially, I mean, more relevant for sites, A&M sites, so being curtailed. So this would give visibility of the potential output of the site when the constraint is no longer active and the site is no longer curtailed. So for example, if it's a 30 megawatt wind farm, before curtailment was doing 15 megawatt, let's say, and then the wind speed increases during the curtailment event. So the potential, having visibility that following after when the constraint is no longer active, the wind farm could jump to 25 megawatt, for example. That's could be useful for like different use cases. Yeah, so real-time network operation, so that that would give visibility of the potential sudden megawatt volume increase seen on the network. Yeah, the other use case is ESO ancillary and balancing services. So providing a view of the sudden potential megawatt volume increase when the constraint, which is holding up the flexible generation, are no longer active. That would be beneficial for frequency balancing of the system and the amount of reserves that can be need to be allocated. And operational forecasting use case. So this would allow to better forecast what the output could be when the constraint is no longer active. So yeah, so better DNO and ESO operational forecasting. Next use case. Yeah, is a state of charge. So that applies only to electricity storage, of course. So that's the how full or empty the battery is. So we have identified two main use cases. So one is operational forecasting again. So having visibility of the state of charge would allow to better model the operational behavior of electricity storage. So for example, if we know that a battery is empty, so zero state of charge, we know that storage is not going to be exporting even if electricity prices are forecasted to be high. So the forecast, and like similar to this, if the state of charge was 100%, then we know that site is not going to be importing. So it's to help us better modeling storage, which ultimately corresponds to more headroom and more capacity allocation to our customers. And the other is DNO ESO services, so having visibility of the duration of the service that storage can provide service for. Yeah, together with the megawatt volume which the storage is providing. So next use case, last one that I'm going to cover here is the service provision. So that the key one is a service being armed and the volume, and the service being delivered in volume. So that's like a real-time type of information. So having visibility for the service being provided in real time, as well as the capacity, will enhance operational forecasting capability. So as an example, if we know that storage is providing DC services at full capacity right now, so that means that in the next IFA block, we could expect the storage site to be responding to frequency for the whole duration of the IFA block. So this will again help us improving our forecasting capability to be able to better model storage and other DR which are providing this type of services. Yeah, and the other is conflict. Sorry, the next use case is conflict service avoidance. Yes, having visibility of the service contracted, armed, and being delivered could avoid conflict of service. So given an agreed set of primacy rules. So for example, if a customer is being curtailed due to a distribution constraint, which consequently has headroom due to a firm DR being turned down, for example, to provide store services. So A&M could avoid releasing capacity if we had visibility of the service that the firm DR was delivering, and that is connected to the constraints. So it would allow us avoiding the service nullification. So that's really important. And the next one is so it's visibility of the volume that can be offered for post-fault services, like dynamic or restore. So having visibility of the service the DR has been contracted to provide, including flexibility service or any ESO service, as well as the visibility of the volume that the DR is reserving, so that is being armed, would allow DNO to have greater visibility of the capacity available, which can be dispatched quickly after a like a fault. So, and that is especially true for post-fault products like dynamic and restore. So that was the use cases for service provision in real time. I think next slide is the conclusion. Yeah. So so we had a big list that we started from, then we looked at use cases at each of them, and then we restricted the table based on the relevance of the use cases that we have identified. And so if we thought that the data point would unlock significant benefit, but for ESO and DNO, then we have recommended the data point to be collected going forward. So this is the final recommendation. So some of them are existing requirements which are already mandated by G99. You can see in the last column is new existing requirements. So for example, measured customer active power. So that's something that is already mandated by G99. The other data point is based on the use cases that we have looked at. So we have some other deliverables coming up before the end of the year. So one is the technical specification. So based on this data point, then we would look at more specification that we would ask customers to provide this data in which format and so on. And the other is the implementation plan, and to look at how this data point would, so how this additional data point would impact if they're going to impact at all, actually, customers, DNO, and so on. So that's going to be part of the next deliverable. And a decode modification may follow the recommendation captured in this report, and which may include an enhancement of what is currently being mandated by G99, but that's still to be discussed. So I'm happy to take any question. I went a bit over my time. Apologies for that. Happy to take any question now.
We have a question from Mike.
Hello.
Mike A. The focus is on the data. The scope and focus seems to be on the data content. Is there any discussion on the harmonization of the technical aspects of the exchange, details of wiring, protocols, etc.? If not, is there likelihood that this will be picked up? So that's the first question. And then there's a follow-on question from that. But if we can pick that up first.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for your question. That's a very good point, actually. So this is the starting point where we actually started from. So to look at which are the interfaces which different DNO uses to collect data from to exchange data with the customer. So some DNO use a protocol interface, some other use hardwire interface, and the implication of protocol and hardwire has like an impact on how many data points can actually be collected, and the scalability going forward. So the scope of this product was not to harmonize the collection infrastructure. So that's a DNO specific practice, which is also influenced by the level of risk that each DNO is willing to take. So hard protocol interface is considered to be a bit less cyber secure, which is, however, mitigated with other practices by the DNO, which makes use of protocol interface. I think ENW and WPD use hardwire interface, which is based on a 4 to 20 milliamp. But yeah, the purpose of this product was not to align on the interface requirement, but rather harmonize the data points themselves. And then it's up to the DNO to make sure that they have the right infrastructure in place to be able to exchange this information with the customer. Hope this answers your question. So next one.
Yeah, so Mike has a follow-up on this, which I think is a second clarification. And slide 32, where you have any specific technology, does any specific technology refer to the generation technology or the data transfer technology?
Yes, that's generation technology. So for example, a state of charge that only applies to electricity storage. Yeah, so it's generation.
Thank you. What is the sampling rate?
So that's what we are going to be looking at. It's part of the next deliverable, so the technical specification. So we started having some discussion on that. And so as part of last year product, we looked at the sampling rate of DNO equipment, which is based on a rate of change of the measurement. So if the measurement changes more than, for example, like 1% of the nominal value, then a new measurement would be pulled. So we are thinking to implement a similar approach for this type of data, but we are still under discussion. So hopefully there's going to be another dissemination forum next year where we can present the findings of the technical specification.
Thanks, Odilia. What is the definition of real time in the same theme? When you talk about real time measurements or monitoring.
Yeah, it's data with, I mean, it's not real time because there is always a delay between the measurement being pulled and the measurement being exposed to the DNO, also considering SCADA delays, which are like 1 to 10 seconds. So it's never going to be real time, but as close to real time as possible. And this type of information are going to be captured in the technical specification that we're going to be looking at. So I think it's important to clarify that it's not post-fault type of post-event type of data like settlement data, but it's SCADA data, which are exposed close to real time from the DNO, from the DR to the DNO. Hope that answers your question, David.
Has there any specific consideration of DR visibility been given to during cold start and restoration?
Any specific consideration of DR visibility? So I guess we need to look at which are the data points that would be required for cold cold start and restoration is probably frequency. So frequency to be able to maintain the energy island, the power island. So that is one of the data points that we looked at, which actually it's in the report, but I didn't go through today. But one of the use case was like distributed restart. So to be able to, so frequency would be required to be able to maintain power island and to re-energize the island to the main network during the restoration process.
Thank you. What is the smallest size of generation of battery of a DR that would be covered by this?
Yeah, so we looked at anything connected from HV to EHV, so that from 6.6 or 11 kV. So that depends on DNO specific practices. Like UKPN is 200 kilowatt, other DNOs is 500 kilowatt. So I don't think would be anything below 200 kilowatt. But then, yeah, it's anything connected EHV and above, basically.
At this stage, anyway.
At this stage, yeah.
Okay, and then the input from Australia, the DNOs, they're looking at IEEE 2030.5 as the base of communication with DR. I don't know whether that has been considered at all by the team. And it sounds like the data to be collected is the focus of the work rather than how it's communicated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we did have like several discussions at the beginning of the product to clarify what we were going to do, if also looking at the communication protocol or just at the data. But it seems because, I mean, there are several reasons why each DNO is using different communication protocol. So yeah, we kept it out of scope. Doesn't mean that in the future we're not going to look at it anymore. But yeah, so this year's scope was mostly data point to be exchanged, and then it's up to each DNO to make sure that they have the right infrastructure to be able to exchange the recommended data points.
Okay, thank you, Adelia. Do we have any more questions? We had a good round of questions here, so thank you all very much for putting your questions in the chat. Is there anything else that anyone would like to cover as part of this session? I think as well answer what was mentioned there. This is really good work. It's one of the reports that I guess pieces of work that had been done that have actually added real insight, even for us, for the networks, in terms of understanding what's happening today in terms of what are the data points that are mandated, what are the use cases, and what is really needed to run networks in a more dynamic way, and try to run them as hard and maximize the utilization, the capacity, and provide as much as we can to customers for connections in that kind of more dynamic way. So I would strongly recommend, if you are interested in this, and it sounds like this is the most I guess popular session that we had up to now. If you are interested, have a look at the report, because there's been lots of good work gone into by the product team, and it's really good. It's really clear. The electricity system operator, so the ESO is hugely interested in this as well, obviously, because of the dynamics changing on the transmission network. So it's one of these areas across transmission and distribution that we are trying to get our head around and work with customers to make sure we do, we can all get to a point where we have the visibility that is needed to be able to operate as efficiently as possible. So I would strongly recommend having a look at the report, at this specific report. Thank you, Adelia.
Thanks, Sotiris, and thanks everyone for the good questions.
Thank you. And we'll, as Ian introduced, we'll move on to Malcolm, who's going to run the kind of the operational data sharing in its more wider sense. So Malcolm, over to you.
Can you hear me first? I was having some difficulties.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I'm Malcolm Greisdale from Northern Power Grid. talk about an initiative we've got to share some data, really expedite that to people who may want to use this, and you'll see as I go through this. So could we get the first slide? Is that ready to go? Seeing it at my end. Hello?
Might be a slight technical issue if it hasn't changed for you. Let me reset it. Are you able to see the correct slide now?
I'm just getting open questions and answers. I don't know what anybody else may be getting.
I can see the slide.
Yeah, we can see the what is the aim. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's looking better now. If we can move on to I should have said the second slide rather than right, there we go. Okay, so the group that I'm kind of talking about, we've been looking at data transfers really between industry partners. I think what you see in that slide is essentially data transfers between distribution operators, transmission operator, or ESO if you prefer, and also both parties and customers and any industry player who may be interested that will require access to the data. That's what we've been aiming to deal with. It's been fairly easy to understand what we currently transfer, and a certain amount of work's been done on initiatives that we know we need, and that's particularly around messaging between the transmission operator and the distribution operator, what to do if something goes wrong, if we get a fault situation. There was a lot of good work done on that in previous years. Can I just move to the next slide? So I guess I've probably talked about some of that. What's being transferred now. We understand the processes within the industry, but I guess where we've got a problem and where this presentation is really going is that it's less clear what we'll need to transfer between both transmission and distribution. And here I'm really talking about distribution because that's where we've created these initiatives. But between really what's the industry and what is a rapidly evolving innovative area, and I'm particularly talking about I guess micro generation, potentially islanded networks, things of that sort of nature, and this is really what we're trying to support. Now in trying to sort of how can we deal with that? How can we deal with that, that unknown? And really the answer, I think, Ofgem said, look, could you just make data available as quickly as you can? And I think some of this is, I think the experience of what happened when Network Rail made signalling data available, people were able to look at that and use it in ways which really you couldn't really have foreseen. And this is really where we're going here. So what we're looking at is 4 sets of data which we can make available in an expedited form. The biggest one really, and it's the one we're all working on, is our what we call telemetry data, operational metering data. This is the information that we've always collected off the network. It's gone into our SCADA systems. We've used it to some extent in controlling the network, but it has probably got much greater use elsewhere as well. So I think if we can go to the next slide, we're all just using what we've got available to essentially make these data sets available. This is UKPN. Some of you are looking at that who have been active in IoT type software. You'll see that's Grafana. It's a standard graphing database. In UKPN's case, and I'm saying this because Richard would have been giving this talk if he was available. that was an existing portal which was available that could be used, and that's the way this data has been potentially made available. In my case, at Northern Power Grid, we're making it available in flat JSON files. So really, this is openly published for anybody who wants to use it. Don't quite know what the feedback's going to be. People will have comments on it, and perhaps want a particular format or a particular volume. I think it's to give industry players a view of what's available, what can be asked for, and I think to give us some feedback on how we might want to automate this in future, how we might want to standardize it. So at the moment, what you're seeing there is telemetry data. But right now, we're publishing information taken from the interface between grid and distribution. The intention is by the end of this year to expand that to really all the data that we can reasonably make available out of our telemetry systems. I think if we can move to the next slide. There eventually, yeah. That's really a list of what you're seeing there is effectively individual lines of data that we are going to release. I obviously don't expect you to read that. It's to give you an indication that there are several data sets. Right now, we're at the top 2 or 3 lines, which is, as I say, grid data. It's amps, volts, kilowatts, kilovars, power factor, that type of information. What I'm making available from Northern Power Grid, it's a very flat file of, it will be half-hourly data, identified by substation and feeder generally, and the type of measurement point that it is. So hopefully in a format which can be readily ingested into third-party time series databases and used in whatever analysis mode that people find would be useful. In addition to the telemetry data, there are 3 other sets of data that we're looking at. Outage data. Now we've got some questions around security. So that initially, I think, is we're going to release that to people who have a direct connection, who need to know what the outage, any outages that appertain to their connection, and that may be helpful in understanding either likely constraints or reductions in security, whatever that might be, and make that available. We also are looking to make available constraint data. Now this varies by DNO depending on the number of A&M schemes that any individual operator actually has active. Here at Northern Power Grid, we've really got one significant one at the moment. Other people have got many more, and releasing that data is dependent on getting those systems to a point where we can report out of them. So little challenge there, and it will be different for different operators. This is very much a best endeavours to give data in whatever form that we can most conveniently do it for now, and based on feedback we can work on that. It's very much an agile approach. I said there was 4. The 4th one is that will be operational planning. Now that is not something that we really do as distribution network operators, so we won't really be able to release anything in that area that's meaningful until into the next regulatory period, ED2, where I think all distribution operators have made bids for, because we need to develop systems that can effectively analyse the whole network. The kind of planning we do now is a worst case, and that's already generally released through DFES and reports that we already put out. But in order to start understanding what might happen next week or tomorrow, that is certainly an aspiration of information we want to make available. So 4 sets of data: telemetry, constraints, outages, and ultimately planning data. See, there's a kind of a timetable to do it. Really, we're aiming for everything that we can by the end of the year. Obviously not the planning data. That's kind of the feel that we're after. Clearly, this is a best endeavours agile approach, not to put a larger sort of I don't know, time delay in making this available than absolutely necessary. And part of that is then going to be seeking feedback. So I think if you can go to the next slide, which I think is the final one. This is just to indicate how we're seeking feedback on that. Obviously, we've got today's dissemination event. We have already had sort of done a survey, and then I think there's something else happening this quarter, but I think we will be seeking ongoing feedback from this. If you want to find Northern Electric's kind of data, certainly you can go to the Northern Electric, Northern Power Grid, Northern Power Grid website, and if you look for future energy network data and grid supply point operational metering data, you'll find our first drop of data, which is a large zip file of JSON, and also a README in there, which will give you some indication of really what you're getting. This is the accuracy was not absolutely specified. It will vary depending on the transducers we've got. Generally, it's 30-minute reports. This sort of stuff, it's raw out of our telemetry systems, so it's for people to consume and I think make comment on and see what might be useful. So with that, I think we're into if got any questions. I did see one pop up there.
Thanks, Malcolm. Yeah, there's a question. I think it's more of a comment. In terms of standardization, whatever the format, the date time is helpful if it is in an ISO 8601 or RFC 3339 format.
So
and this,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Carry on.
No.
Say, in my case, I mean, I'm open to. We're open to do whatever is helpful, but it is a standard ISO format. I don't have the magic numbers in my head right now, but certainly when Northern Power Grid have published the JSON file, you should find that as a standard date time format.
Okay, thank you. So I think that's more one for us to take away, and consider the kind of the impact of time clock changes on the data.
There should be no time clock. So there should be no sort of daylight savings changes. It will be all UTC, things of that sort of nature.
Okay, thank you.
Have any others?
Do you have any other questions on this? So there is there's a question about a link to access the data. So how do we access this data?
The moment it will vary by network operator, because we've all got different systems, and we are publishing just in whatever is the how would you say, line of least resistance. In Northern Power Grid's case, it's on our website as a downloadable zip file right now. We really do want to look at how does this want to be published going forward. I don't think we're publishing it right now in monthly blocks. I think going forward, people are quite likely to want that in a much more up to date and smaller block format. I kind of don't have a problem with that. It's based on what feedback turns out to be to come and what we can realistically do. I think ultimately I could see that this may well lead to near real-time data drops. Right now, we're all reporting out of our historian systems just to get this available to you. So I think just to give some idea there.
Thank you. Avi, you want to come in?
Yes, I just want to flag that the product team have published a tracker of the data sharing, and I think on the document you'll find links to the individual DNO sites where you can access them. That's probably an easy route for the physical link. I mean,
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Yeah,
I think
yeah. So do you gonna put this on the chat? So
yeah, I'll do
I
that.
think since the question has been asked, because that's all the information you need is there, isn't it? What's available and how you get it. Is it time series? The format
Sorry,
of data.
I just broke up there. I got time series there.
Yeah, is the data in the format of time series?
It will be time series data. The way I have provided the Northern Power Grid data, and I can't speak for other people right now, is it's a sort of a fairly flat JSON format where it's effectively two nested arrays, one of all the actual individual measurement points, and then within there you've got an object which is effectively substation, feeder, measurement type, measurement unit, and then an array of two value objects, which is effectively the time and the value. So that's what I am providing. I felt that was something which could be easily parsed and consumed into readily available time series databases like Influx, that type of thing, where that helps.
Yeah. Okay, good. So Malcolm, as you said, I mean, there's a lot of focus from Bayes and Ofgem on this. Ofgem also published an open letter calling for action. So really the purpose of your group is to we've come up with a list of data. There is a date that each DNO is aiming to have those published in whatever format, whether it's the data, their open data portal, or however else they do it on their website. And there's a RAG status in terms of monitoring progress against that commitment as well. So that's all on the tracker. I think that you saw it on the slide. And there's a lots of useful data. And as you said, the important thing here now is to start getting some feedback in terms of what people want. This is what they want. Questions that they have in terms of what are these data and how they can use them, and also give us some example where the data has been used and have been useful, because that helps us kind of keep building the case for open data, which of course central aspect, but it's important to be getting the feedback and understanding how it actually generates value, given there's a cost associated with all of these activities. Okay, Malcolm.
As I say, as one closing thing, it's probably worth just kind of positioning where this is, that this is very much a accelerated, get it out there, receive the feedback as I just said, and that will, I think, drive into what is a larger or more ongoing project about data generally, which is the data. I can't remember the name, but there's certainly there's a strand at Open Networks about making data available generally, and if that influences the types of portal that we need, the types of connection we need as part of that Open Data Initiative, I think it is. That's one of the things that this really needs to support. So your feedback will go directly to that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So have a look at the data and give us some feedback. I think is the key message here. Thanks, Malcolm. Thanks for your time.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone.
And then we are over to Avi for the wider program updates. Avi.
Thank you so much. Connor's just going to be putting the link for the tracker that I just mentioned earlier. You should probably be able to access the document from there. But having gone through the individual detailed discussion on the products, this is a quick opportunity for me to kind of flag some of the wider program updates. So we've currently, and in earnest, going forward with the scoping exercise for 2023. This is there are a lot of things happening in the industry, and we've done a stellar job in the past 5 years, but we can't be complacent in what we've done. So we think that this is an opportunity for us to take a look, engage with our key stakeholders, including Ofgem, Bayes, and our challenge group members. And we take that on board to come up with what should be the delivery program for the next year. That is in progress right now. Hopefully in the weeks to come, perhaps by towards the next dissemination forum, we'll have a site of that document for you to take a look at. In terms of a slightly, more close to real time, we've just closed the flexibility consultation. I think I touched upon this in my initial intro as well. So we'll be going away, reviewing that, feeding some of the thought process into our scoping exercise as well, and publish the outcomes or our thoughts or other reflections on the comments we've received in November. Another key aspect of the program in the second half is that the way we structured the program in the first half is we've identified areas, deliberated amongst ourselves, and come out with our recommendation on how we think we should be going forward. And having received the inputs from various channels, including the consultation, now the task is on us to translate that to implementing those recommendations. So reflect the feedback we've received. Some of them are completely in alignment. Some of them are some new information that we need to take on board and maybe slightly tweak our direction of travel. In any case, that's what I meant by this sort of engagement is really useful. So we take that on board and put that to a proper implementation plan across the relevant products. That's the plan for the second half of the year. And if you need a link to the overall delivery program, I think there's a link attached. You should have access to that in the slide. But that's pretty much what I want to give you a quick overview on the program updates. Any questions or comments? I'm happy to take them. Back to you, Sir Davis.
Thanks, Avi. And I think as part of the wider program updates as well, we've got also the next item is the recent and up-and-coming events with Emily. So Emily, over to you.
Afternoon, everyone. Yep, so I'm just going to give you a bit of an update on what we've been up to. So as you'll be well aware, the flexibility consultation has been our key focus over the past month or so. We had a range of stakeholder engagement activities in the lead up to the close of the consultation to make sure that we're engaging with as many people as possible. An overview is on the shared slide, but hopefully you'll be aware that we had a technical consultation webinar at the start of the consultation period. That's available on ENA's YouTube channel should you wish to go back and refer to that. We also had a joint webinar with Business Green in August. That was a bit of a broader session on flexibility, which touched on the consultation as well. Again, that's available online should you wish to watch that. Some really interesting nuggets there from our external attendees and guests. And then the last piece of work, we had our Community Energy Forum. So this was a closed forum specifically for community energy reps, which the Open Networks team and a range of DNO representatives attended, and we had a really good interactive session there as well. And the recording for that won't be available online. As I said, that's a closed session. However, you'll be able to see their response in the public responses once we publish those following the response that we share in the next, I think, month or so. And then in terms of upcoming events, we've got our Energy Innovation Summit. So for those of you who are perhaps in Scotland or near Glasgow, this is our first in-person innovation event, I think, for a couple of years now. It's really, really exciting for us. It's going to be at the SEC in Glasgow, and we've got a packed agenda, and you can still sign up for that over the next few days, I think right up until Monday or Tuesday next week. So do feel free to do so. And if we'll have a number of representatives there from our side. So if you would like to let us know if you'd like to meet for a coffee or do some networking, then do feel free to get in touch. And then the final thing, just more for your awareness, is we are launching a podcast series. So we have a general engagement series called Next for Net Zero, which has had a range of webinars and in-person events so far. So we are adding to this program with our new limited podcast series. We'll have 4 podcasts going out over the course of the next month or so, all looking at different areas related back to net zero and different themes. The first podcast will be going out next Thursday, the 29th of September. We'll have Cadent and Scottish Power Energy Networks speaking as guests on that podcast. So really just an informal way to kind of talk about the relevant topics of today. So we'll be sharing a bit more information about that in the coming days, but would really welcome your feedback on the content and if the kind of information that we share and the insights that we share are engaging. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Okay, are there any questions? If you have any questions on what Emily just covered or what Avi covered, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We've come to the end of our agenda in terms of the presentation. So we've presented, we cover things like alignment of procurement processes, alignment of standards. You know, this is not the big industry changes that you know, people want to talk about, but it's really the you know, and some of the stuff is hard as well, because when you talk procurement processes or contract changes, you are looking at 7 companies and 7 sets of lawyers trying to work some of these things through. And, you know, we are making, fast progress in terms of bringing some consistency and standardization on that. But these are really all the different pieces of the puzzle that we need in order to be able to offer, faster connections or, lower bills to our customers, taking into account flexibility and all the technology and data. And we looked at the data work streams where, which will be key if we want to be talking about smart and flexible energy systems. We've got to get these things sorted and aligned. So lots of good work. If you want to engage or give us feedback, please do so. You've got the contact details. Feel free to follow up. If there's something that you said you liked, please help us spread the word in terms of some of that work, because it can help more widely those in engaging with networks or wide in the whole system in the sector. And the last thing to say is thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate everybody's really busy, so thank you very much for giving us your time and this morning. So thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.